Dad always said I did not have the killer instinct to be a real lawyer. He said the law was a man's game and that my brother Trey was the shark of the family. He even skipped my law school graduation to play golf because he claimed he already knew I would end up pushing papers in a basement somewhere. Well, yesterday morning, a desperate partnership proposal from his failing firm landed on my mahogany desk. He is begging for a buyout from Vanguard Legal Group, the $3 billion firm he idolizes. What he does not know is that I am the managing partner of Vanguard. I am the shark he is swimming toward, and tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp, I am going to eat him alive. Before I tell you how I dismantled my father's entire legacy in a single meeting, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who secretly outgrew the flock. My name is Gabrielle Sterling, and I am 32 years old. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. The invitation said 40 years of excellence for Sterling and Sons. It was being held at the Oakwood Country Club, one of those old money establishments in upstate New York, where the walls are lined with portraits of men who look exactly like my father, and the air smells of expensive scotch and exclusion. I pulled my sedan up to the valet stand. I could have driven my Porsche Panamera, but I left it in the garage of my penthouse. Tonight, I did not want them to know. Not yet. I wanted to see them as they truly were when they thought I was nothing. I stepped out of the car, smoothing down the lapels of my black suit. To the untrained eye, it looked like a simple conservative outfit suitable for a public defender or a clerk. But a trained eye would have noticed the hand-stitched seams of the Italian silk, the way the fabric draped perfectly without a single wrinkle, and the bespoke tailoring that cost $5,000. My family did not have trained eyes. They only saw what they wanted to see. I walked toward the massive double doors, taking a deep breath to armor myself against the toxicity I knew was waiting inside. Before I could even reach the handle, the doors swung open. It was not a doorman. It was Tiffany. Tiffany is my sister-in-law, my brother Trey's wife. She is 26 years old and treats life like a reality TV show audition. She was wearing a silver dress that cost more than my first car, covered in sequins that caught the light aggressively. Her blonde hair was teased high and her makeup was flawless, but her eyes were cold. As soon as she saw me, her face twisted into a mixture of relief and disdain. "Oh, thank God you are finally here," Gabby Tiffany said, without a hello. She reached out and grabbed my arm, pulling me inside the foyer. "You are late. I told your mother you would flake out, but here you are." "Barely." I frowned, pulling my arm back gently. "Hello to you too, Tiffany. I got stuck in traffic coming from the city." Yeah, whatever," Tiffany interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "Look, we have a crisis. Two of the servers called out sick and the bartender is overwhelmed. We have 200 VIP guests in the ballroom and nobody is circulating the champagne." She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my black suit with a sneer. "Thank God you wore that drab little suit. You blend right in with the catering staff. Here." She turned to a passing waiter, snatched a heavy silver tray loaded with crystal champagne flutes, and shoved it into my hands. The tray was cold and heavy. I stood there blinking in shock. "Tiffany, I am a guest," I said, my voice low but firm. "I am Reginald's daughter. I am not here to serve drinks." Tiffany let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "Oh, honey, don't be dramatic. You are family, which means you help out. Besides, it is not like you are comfortable socializing with these people. There are senators and CEOs in there, Gabby. Real movers and shakers. You would just stand in the corner awkwardly anyway. At least this way you make yourself useful. Go on. Table 4 needs a refill." My grip tightened on the silver tray. The urge to drop it right there on the marble floor to let the crystal shatter and announce exactly who I was burned in my chest. I wanted to tell her that the suit she called drab was designed by a woman in Milan who only accepts 10 clients a year. I wanted to tell her that the CEOs in that room were people I had breakfast with. But before I could speak, a booming voice echoed from the hallway. "What is the holdup out here?" My father, Reginald Sterling, marched into the foyer. At 60, he was still an imposing man, tall and broad with a perfectly trimmed gray beard and a tuxedo that strained slightly at the buttons. He looked at Tiffany, then at me, then at the tray in my hands. For a second I thought he would defend me. I thought he would tell Tiffany that his daughter was not a waitress. "Dad, Tiffany is trying to make me work the floor," I said, looking him in the eye. Reginald sighed, rubbing his temples as if I was an unruly teenager causing a scene. "Gabrielle, do not start drama tonight. This is the biggest night of my life. The partners from the Henderson Group are here. I need everything to be perfect." He gestured to the tray. "Just do as Tiffany says. We are short-handed. And honestly, it is better if you have something to do. You know you don't fit in with the investors. I don't want you saying something foolish about your little pro bono cases and boring everyone." The words felt like a physical slap. My own father was ashamed of me. He did not just think I was unsuccessful, he thought I was an embarrassment. "Remember to use the service entrance if you need to go to the kitchen," Reginald added, turning his back on me to fix his tie in the mirror. "And try to smile. You look miserable." I watched them walk away together, Tiffany linking her arm through his, whispering something that made him chuckle. I stood alone in the foyer holding a tray of champagne that cost $15 a glass, while wearing a watch hidden under my sleeve that cost $50,000. I did not drop the tray. I did not scream. A cold calm settled over me. It was the same icy focus I used when I was closing a hostile takeover. If they wanted a servant, I would play the servant. It would make the reveal tomorrow so much sweeter. I adjusted my grip on the silver handles, forced a polite smile onto my face, and walked into the ballroom. The room was a sea of tuxedos and gowns. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over the crowd. I moved through the room offering drinks to people who had known me since I was a child. "Oh, thank you, dear," my Aunt Sarah said, taking a glass without even looking at my face. She did not even recognize me. To them, I was just a body in a black suit, a piece of furniture. I saw my brother Trey holding court near the bar. He was laughing loudly, holding a glass of scotch in one hand and a cigar in the other. He looked exactly like a younger, softer version of our father. He had never won a difficult case in his life. He spent his days charming clients and his nights spending their retainers. Yet here he was, the prince of the evening. I circulated the room for an hour listening. That is the thing about being invisible. People say things in front of the help that they would never say in mixed company. I heard the CFO of a rival firm whisper to his wife, "Sterling is desperate. I heard they are leveraging the building just to make payroll this month." I heard a judge say Trey is a liability. If Reginald wasn't protecting him, he would have been disbarred years ago. I stored every word away. Ammunition. Suddenly the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage at the front of the room. My father walked up to the podium, basking in the applause. He adjusted the microphone and beamed at the crowd. "Thank you all for coming," he boomed, his voice filled with practiced charisma. 40 years. It feels like yesterday I started this firm with nothing but a desk and a dream. And look at us now." The crowd clapped. I stood in the back near the kitchen doors, still holding the half-empty tray. "Building a legacy is not about money," my father continued, his eyes scanning the room. "It is about blood. It is about passing the torch to the next generation who has the strength to carry it." He gestured dramatically to the side of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the future of Sterling and Sons. My son, my partner, and the finest legal mind of his generation, Trey Sterling." Trey jogged up to the stage, waving both hands like a prizefighter. Tiffany shrieked with delight from the front row, clapping so hard her bracelets jingled. I watched my father wrap an arm around Trey's shoulders. "I have been blessed," my father said, his voice getting thick with emotion. Every father dreams of having a son who can walk in his footsteps, a son who understands that the law is about power and precision. Trey has that DNA. He is a natural-born killer in the courtroom. I felt a bitter taste in my mouth. Trey had failed the bar exam twice. I passed it on the first try with the highest score in the state. "And you know," my father chuckled, leaning into the microphone, Folks ask me, Reginald, what about your daughter? Don't you have a girl too? The room went quiet. I stiffened in the shadows. And I say, yes, I do. My father said, his tone shifting from pride to a patronizing pity. I have a daughter, Gabrielle. She is a sweet girl. But she chose a different path. A quieter path. She works in public defense, I believe, helping the less fortunate. He paused for effect, letting the crowd murmur. It is noble work, really it is. But let's be honest, legal warfare is not for everyone. Some people are built for the front lines like Trey, and some people are built for supporting roles, and that is okay. We need people to handle the paperwork right. The crowd erupted in laughter. It was a polite ripple of amusement, but to me it sounded like a roar. Trey was on stage laughing the hardest, patting his father on the back. Tiffany turned around in her seat, scanning the back of the room, trying to find me to see if I had heard. I stood there frozen. He had not just ignored me. He had publicly neutered me. He had told 200 of the most influential people in our social circle that I was weak, that I was irrelevant, that I was a paper pusher. My phone buzzed in my inner pocket against my ribs. It buzzed once, then twice. I shifted the tray to one hand and slipped my phone out, the screen glowing in the darkness of the ballroom. It was a message from my executive assistant at Vanguard. The text read, "Due diligence complete. The forensic audit of Sterling & Sons is attached. We found the missing trust fund money. It is worse than we thought. They are technically insolvent. The dossier is on your desk for the 9 a.m. meeting." I looked down at the phone, then up at the stage. My father was raising a toast to Trey, clinking their glasses together, celebrating a future that did not exist. They were celebrating on the deck of the Titanic, and I was the iceberg. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. The shame that had been burning my face moments ago evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, hard satisfaction. "You are right, Dad," I whispered to the empty air. "I am not built for your kind of war. I am built for nuclear winter." I walked over to the nearest table and set the tray down with a decisive clatter. I did not look back at the stage. I turned around and walked out the service doors into the cool night air. I had a meeting to prepare for, and I needed to make sure my suit was pressed for the execution. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung shut behind me, cutting off the sound of applause and the clinking of champagne glasses. The sudden silence in the hallway was jarring. My ears were still ringing with the echo of my father's voice telling 200 people that I was built for a supporting role. I needed to get out of there. I needed to get to my car, drive back to my penthouse, and scrub the feeling of this night off my skin. I walked down the long carpeted corridor toward the private members area where the coat check was located. The air here was different. It smelled of old leather and expensive Cuban tobacco. This was the inner sanctum of the Oakwood Country Club, a place where deals were made and secrets were kept. As I approached the mahogany door of the cigar lounge, I saw it was cracked open just an inch. A sliver of yellow light spilled out onto the carpet. I was about to walk past it when I heard a sound that made me freeze. It was the sound of glass shattering. Not an accidental drop like a waiter might make, but the violent, deliberate sound of a tumbler being thrown against a wall. "You are an idiot, Trey." The voice belonged to my father. But it was not the charismatic, booming baritone he had used on stage just 10 minutes ago. It was a harsh, desperate hiss. It was the voice of a man standing on the edge of a cliff. I stopped breathing. I stepped closer to the wall, pressing my back against the damask wallpaper, making myself invisible in the shadows. "Relax, Dad." Trey's voice drifted out lazy and slurred. He was drunk. The arrogance I had seen on his face earlier was still there, but now it was mixed with a dangerous carelessness. "It is just a glass. Put it on the tab. Put everything on the tab." "There is no tab, you fool." My father sounded like he was strangling the words out. "There is no money left. Do you understand English? And we are tapped out. The bank called me this morning. They are freezing the operating accounts on Monday if we don't make the interest payment. I stood there in the hallway and felt a cold chill run down my spine. Sterling and Sons. The firm my father claimed was a pillar of the legal community was broke, but that wasn't the part that made my blood run cold. Businesses fail all the time. It was what came next. So let them freeze it. Trey laughed. Who cares? By Monday, we will have signed the letter of intent with Vanguard. Once that merger goes through, their capital covers our debt. That is how it works, right? The big fish eats the little fish and inherits all the little fish's problems. I felt my heart hammer against my ribs. Vanguard. They were talking about my firm. They were talking about the deal I was supposed to review tomorrow morning. It is not just debt, Trey. My father's voice dropped lower, trembling with rage. If the auditors from Vanguard dig too deep, if they look at the client trust funds, we go to jail, Trey. We don't go bankrupt. We go to federal prison. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. The client trust fund. In the legal world, that is the sacred line you never cross. That is money belonging to clients' settlement checks, insurance, payouts, funds held in escrow. Touching a single cent of that money is immediate disbarment and a felony charge. You worry too much, old man. Trey sounded dismissive, as if they were discussing a parking ticket. I borrowed a little. So what? I needed the down payment for the penthouse. Tiffany wanted the new Bentley. We have to keep up appearances, right? You are the one who always told me perception is reality. If we look rich, people trust us. You stole $2.4 million from the widow's fund. My father sounded defeated now, his anger replaced by a terrified exhaustion. That money was for the unsuspecting victims of the chemical plant lawsuit. And you spent it on cars and vacations. I listened to the silence that followed. I waited for my father to say he was going to turn Trey in. I waited for him to say he was going to sell his house to pay it back. I waited for a shred of integrity. Instead, I heard the strike of a match and the sizzle of tobacco. We just need to stall them, my father said finally. We sign the deal with Vanguard tomorrow. We get the buyout check. We use the upfront cash to refill the trust account before anyone notices it is empty. Then we hand over the keys and the debt to Vanguard. By the time they realize the client list is inflated and the assets are worthless, you and I will be retired. They are trying to defraud us, Trey said with a chuckle. No, Dad. We are outsmarting them. Vanguard is just a big, faceless corporate machine. They have so much money they won't even notice a few million missing. They are stupid rich. Let them pay for my lifestyle. They owe us. I slowly reached into my pocket. My hand was shaking not from fear, but from a rage so pure and hot it felt like lava in my veins. They were not just bad businessmen. They were criminals. They had stolen from widows and orphans to buy Bentleys and throw parties. And now they were planning to use my company, my hard work, and my reputation as their getaway car. They thought Vanguard was a faceless machine. They thought the managing partner was some oblivious executive in a glass tower who wouldn't check the fine print. I pulled out my phone. I unlocked it and swiped to the voice memo app. I did not step into the room. I did not confront them. Not yet. That would be too easy. That would give them a chance to come up with a lie. I held the phone up to the crack in the door and pressed the red record button. So, what is the plan for the meeting tomorrow? Trey asked. Who are we meeting with anyway? Some mid-level manager. No, my father replied. The email said we are meeting with the managing partner, someone named G. Sterling. Probably some old guy related to the founders. I will handle him. I will give him the speech about legacy and honor. These corporate types eat that stuff up. I will charm him, we will sign the papers, and then we book tickets to the south of France. I watched the waveform on my screen dance as it captured their conspiracy. G. Sterling. He didn't even know. He was so blinded by his own arrogance, he didn't even realize that G stood for Gabrielle. And what about Gabby? Trey asked. His voice was mocking now. Should we cut her in? Throw her a few thousand to pay off her student loans? My father snorted. Don't waste your breath. She wouldn't understand high finance. She is too soft. She has no stomach for what needs to be done. Let her keep working her little charity cases. When we are rich and living in Europe, she can have the old house. The bank is going to foreclose on it anyway in 6 months. Let that be her inheritance. I stopped the recording. I saved the file. I named it Evidence A. I lowered the phone and stared at the wood grain of the door. A tear slipped down my cheek, but it was not a tear of sadness. It was the final drop of affection leaving my body. The father I had spent my whole life trying to impress was dead to me. The brother I had defended on the playground was gone. In that cigar smoke-filled hallway, the Gabrielle who sought approval died, and the managing partner was born. I turned around and walked back down the hallway. My footsteps were silent on the plush carpet. I did not go to the coat check. I did not get my jacket. The cold night air outside would feel good. I walked out of the service entrance past the dumpsters and the smoking catering staff. I walked to my car, my mind racing, not with panic, but with a cold mathematical precision. 2.4 million in embezzlement, bank fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. They wanted a meeting with Vanguard. They wanted to sell their firm. I unlocked my car door and sat in the driver's seat. The leather was cool against my back. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My eyes were dry. My expression was stone. You want to sell your soul? Daddy, I whispered to the reflection. Fine, I am buying. And I promise you I am going to keep the receipt. I started the engine. The dashboard clock read 10 p.m. I had 11 hours until the meeting. 11 hours to prepare the cage. 11 hours to sharpen the knife. I pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the glowing lights of the country club behind me. I drove toward the city, toward the skyscraper that bore my name. They thought they were the predators. They had no idea they had just invited the executioner to the table. The morning sun was hitting the glass facade of the Millennium Tower as I stepped out of the elevator onto the 45th floor. This was the building where my brother Trey lived. Or rather, where he pretended to live. The lease on this penthouse cost $15,000 a month. I knew this because I had seen the bank statements during my forensic audit last night. He had paid the first 2 months with a check from the client trust fund, and he was currently 3 weeks late on this month's rent. The eviction notice was likely already in the mail system, but looking at the gold-plated door handle, you would never guess the occupants were technically destitute. My phone buzzed at 7 a.m. sharp. It was Tiffany. Her voice was syrupy sweet, a tone she only used when she wanted something or when she was about to deliver a backhanded compliment. She told me to come over immediately because she had a surprise for me. She said she was doing a closet cleanse and had some designer pieces she wanted to donate to the less fortunate. She meant me. I checked my watch. It was a Patek Philippe Nautilus with a rose gold bezel worth more than the average American salary. I kept it hidden under the sleeve of my off-the-rack blazer. I had plenty of time before the 9 a.m. execution at my office. I decided to indulge her. I wanted to see the arrogance one last time before I stripped it away. I knocked on the heavy door. It swung open, revealing Tiffany in a silk robe that was barely tied shut. She looked exhausted. Her mascara was smudged under her eyes, and she was holding a half-empty bottle of detox water. Behind her, the pristine white apartment looked like a war zone. There were empty champagne bottles on the kitchen island, discarded shoes in the hallway, and a general sense of chaotic excess. "Oh, good you are here," Tiffany yawned, stepping back to let me in. She did not offer me coffee. She did not ask how I was. She simply turned and walked toward the sunken living room, her heels clicking on the marble. I followed her, stepping over a pile of dry cleaning. The apartment smelled of stale alcohol and expensive dog shampoo. "Come here, look at this," Tiffany said, pointing to a pile of clothes dumped carelessly on the beige sofa. "I am making room for the new season. Trey promised me a shopping spree in Paris after this merger deal goes through today. He says we are going to be flush with cash, so I need to get rid of the old stuff." She reached into the pile and pulled out a green Gucci dress. It was made of delicate chiffon. It was beautiful until she turned it around. The zipper was completely ripped out, and there was a jagged tear along the hemline where a heel had obviously caught it. "Here," Tiffany said, tossing the dress at me. I caught it reflexively. "This is vintage Gucci." "Well, last season, but for you, it is practically couture. I wore it once to a gala, and honestly, it is a bit tight on me now, but with your figure, it should hang loose enough to hide the damage. You can sew right." I looked at the ruined dress in my hands. It was garbage. She was gifting me her trash and expecting gratitude. "Thanks, Tiffany," I said, my voice flat. "But I don't think this is my style. Beggars can't be choose." "Gabby," she snapped, her voice sharpening. "That dress cost $4,000. That is like 3 months of your salary at the public defender's office. Take it. Sell it on eBay if you are too proud to wear it. God knows you need the money." She flopped down onto the sofa, narrowly missing a small trembling chihuahua that was shivering under a blanket. "Actually, since you are here," she said, waving a hand at the floor, "can you do me a solid? The maid called in sick because apparently she expects to be paid on time or something. Ridiculous, right? Anyway, Princess had a little accident on the rug over there." She pointed to a dark red stain on the white flocati rug. It looked like red wine mixed with something worse. "Since you are already standing there, can you grab the carpet cleaner and scrub that out? It smells awful, and I have a facialist coming at 10. I stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. She did not see a sister-in-law. She saw a servant. She saw a creature beneath her existing, only to absorb her insults and clean up her messes. I dropped the green dress on the floor. It landed with a soft rustle. "No, Tiffany," I said. She blinked, sitting up straighter. "Excuse me." I said no. I pulled back my sleeve, revealing the rose gold watch. The diamonds on the face caught the morning light, sending a sharp glint across the room. I checked the time. It was 8:15. "I don't have time to clean your rug," I said, my voice cool and steady. "I have a meeting. A very important merger meeting." Tiffany stared at the watch. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, trying to process what she was seeing, but her brain rejected the reality. She could not accept that Gabrielle the failure could own a Patek Philippe. She probably assumed it was a fake, a knockoff I bought on Canal Street to play pretend. She let out a harsh bark of laughter. "A merger meeting. Oh, that is rich. What are you merging, Gabby? Your unemployment files with your student loan debt?" She stood up, tightening her robe, her face twisting into a sneer. "Don't pretend you are important in front of me. I know who you are. Reginald told me everything. You are the family charity case. The only reason you are even allowed in this apartment is because Trey feels sorry for you." She stepped closer, invading my personal space. Her breath smelled of mint and bile. "Real business is for men like Trey and your father. They are out there conquering the world, building a legacy. You are just here. So if you are not going to clean the rug, then get out. And take that trash dress with you. Consider it a severance package from the family." I looked at her. I looked at the fear behind her eyes, the desperate need to feel superior, because deep down, she knew she brought nothing to the table but debt and demands. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who knows the trap has already snapped shut. "You are right, Tiffany," I said softly. "Real business is about legacy. And today, you are going to see exactly what kind of legacy Trey has built." I turned on my heel. "Hey!" Tiffany yelled after me. "Where are you going? Pick up that dress." I walked to the door, not looking back. "Keep it," I called out over my shoulder. "You are going to need something to wear to court." I shut the door behind me, cutting off her confused shouting. I walked to the elevator, feeling lighter than I had in years. The prelude was over. The stage was set. It was time to go to work. I took the elevator down to the lobby, walked past the doorman who nodded respectfully at my suit, and stepped into the waiting black car. "To the Vanguard building," I told the driver. "And step on it. I don't want to keep my acquisition waiting." The drive to my childhood home in Scarsdale always felt like traveling back in time to a period I tried desperately to forget. The house was a sprawling brick colonial, sitting on 2 acres of manicured lawn, that cost more to maintain than most people earned in a year. From the street, it looked like the American dream. It had white pillars, a circular driveway, and ivy climbing the walls. But to me, it looked like a prison. My father, Reginald, had called me an hour after I left Tiffany's apartment. His voice on the phone had been different. He sounded frail. He sounded weak. He told me his heart was acting up again and that the stress of the merger was killing him. He asked me to come over just for a few minutes. He said he needed his daughter, not his son. His daughter. Despite everything I knew about him, despite the years of neglect and the public humiliation last night, a small, foolish part of me wanted to believe him. The child inside me who just wanted her dad to be proud still had a pulse. So I turned my car around and drove into the lion's den. I parked my car next to his vintage Jaguar. The house was quiet. I let myself in with my old key. The foyer smelled exactly as I remembered. Lemon polish, old wood, and the lingering scent of my father's expensive cologne. I found him in his study. It was a dark room lined with bookshelves filled with law books he hadn't opened in 20 years. He was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, wrapped in a thick cardigan instead of his usual suit. He looked smaller somehow. He was rubbing his left arm and grimacing. "Gabby," he said softly when I walked in. "Thank you for coming. Sit down, please." I sat in the leather chair opposite him. The leather was cold and stiff. "How are you feeling, Dad?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He sighed, a long, rattling sound that seemed a bit too theatrical. "Old age is a thief, Gabby. My heart isn't what it used to be. The doctor says I need to reduce my stress. I need to retire. That is why this deal with Vanguard is so important. It is not just business anymore. It is survival." He looked at me with watery eyes. "I want to make things right before I go. I know I have been hard on you. I know I pushed you away. But it was only because I wanted you to be tough. The world is cruel to women, Gabby. I wanted you to be a fighter." I stayed silent. I watched his hands. They were trembling slightly. "I want to secure the family's future," he continued, opening a drawer. "Trey is brilliant, but he is impulsive. You know that. He needs a safety net. And I need to know that when I am gone, my children will look out for each other." He slid a stack of papers across the desk toward me. It was bound in a blue legal folder. "What is this?" I asked, not touching it yet. "Just some insurance paperwork," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Standard stuff. It is a cross-collateralization agreement. Since Trey is taking over the firm's assets, I want you to be listed as a beneficiary. But because of the way the trust is set up, the bank needs a family member to countersign as a secondary guarantor. It is just a formality, really. It just says that if anything happens to me, you and Trey stand together." He pulled a gold Mont Blanc pen from his pocket and set it on top of the papers. "Sign it for me, Gabby. Give an old man some peace of mind." I looked at the pen. Then I looked at the document. The cover page looked innocent enough. It was titled Family Asset Protection Agreement. But I am not a public defender who processes traffic tickets. I am a corporate shark who eats complex contracts for breakfast. I opened the folder. I skipped the first 2 pages of legal fluff about family unity and love. My eyes scanned for the definitions section. I looked for the clauses in fine print. And there it was on page 4, buried in a paragraph about liability. The term was unlimited personal guarantee. I felt a cold spike of adrenaline hit my stomach. This was not insurance. This was a death sentence. The document stated that by signing as a secondary guarantor, I was agreeing to be jointly and severally liable for all past, present, and future debts incurred by Sterling and Sons and by Trey Sterling personally. It meant that if Trey defaulted on a loan, the bank wouldn't just take the company assets. They could come after me. They could take my penthouse. They could garnish my wages. They could seize my personal investment accounts. And since I knew for a fact that the firm was $5 million in debt and Trey had embezzled millions more signing, this document would bankrupt me instantly. My father wasn't trying to protect me, he was trying to offload the sinking ship onto my back. He knew the Vanguard deal might fall through or that the auditors might find the fraud. He needed a fresh victim to feed to the banks. I looked up at him. The frail old man act suddenly looked very thin. Beneath the cardigan, I saw the tension in his shoulders. He was watching me like a hawk waiting for the ink to hit the paper. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice calm. "This isn't insurance. This is an unlimited personal guarantee." He blinked, feigning confusion. "It is just legal jargon, Gabby. You know how lawyers write these things. It just means we are a team. It means that if Trey buys a Ferrari and doesn't pay for it, the bank takes my house," I said. "It means I am liable for the firm's debts. All of them, even the ones from the client trust fund." His eyes narrowed slightly. The watery sentimentality vanished for a split second. "Why are you being so difficult?" he asked, his voice hardening. "It is standard procedure for family businesses. Don't you trust your brother? Don't you trust me?" "I trust contracts," I said. "And this contract says I am volunteering to be the scapegoat. I can't sign this, Dad. I need to take this home and have my lawyer look at it." I started to close the folder. That was the trigger. Reginald's hand shot across the desk and slammed down on the papers. The force was so sudden it made the gold pen jump and roll onto the floor. "You will sign it now," he barked. The frailty was gone. The heart condition was miraculously cured. He stood up, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "I don't need your lawyer to look at it. I am your father. I am the best lawyer you know. Are you telling me you think I'm trying to trick you?" "Yes," I said, standing up to meet his gaze. "That is exactly what I think. You ungrateful little brat!" He screamed, spit flying from his mouth. He looked exactly like the monster from my childhood. "I gave you life. I put a roof over your head. And now when I ask for one small favor, you treat me like a criminal. You are asking me to sign away my financial freedom for Trey," I said, my voice rising. "Why doesn't Trey sign it?" "Trey is the asset," Reginald shouted, pounding his fist on the desk. "You are the insurance. That is your role in this family, Gabrielle. You exist to support him. He is going to be a legal legend. You are nobody. You are nothing without the sterling name. Now pick up that pen and sign the paper, or so help me God, I will cut you out of this family forever." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had terrified me for 32 years. I looked at the veins bulging in his neck. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't scared. I was disgusted. He was desperate. He was broke. And he was trying to steal the only thing I had left, my future. I reached down and picked up the gold Mont Blanc pen from the floor. Reginald stopped screaming, panting heavily, thinking he had won. A smug smile started to form on his lips. "Good girl," he wheezed. "I knew you would do the right thing." I looked at the pen. It was heavy, expensive. I placed the pen gently on the desk. "No," I said. The silence that followed was louder than his screaming. "What did you say?" he whispered. I said, "No, I am not signing. And I am not nobody, Dad." I turned around and walked toward the door. "If you walk out that door," Reginald screamed, his voice cracking, "you are dead to me. Do you hear me? You are not my daughter. Don't come crawling back when you fail. Don't ask me for a dime when your little life falls apart." I stopped at the doorway. I didn't turn around. "I won't," I said. I walked out of the study, down the hall, and out the front door. The sun was shining outside, but the air felt colder than before. I got into my car and locked the doors. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. They were shaking from the adrenaline of freedom. He had just played his final card. He had tried to enslave me, and he had failed. I checked my watch. It was now 8:45. I put the car in gear. "See you in 15 minutes, Dad," I whispered. I drove away from the brick colonial house for the last time. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was the managing partner. And business was about to pick up. The elevator ride to the 50th floor of the Millennium Tower took exactly 45 seconds. In that short span of time, I shed the skin of Gabrielle, the disappointed daughter, and fully inhabited G. Sterling, the managing partner. I watched the numbers climb on the digital display, and with every floor that passed, I felt the weakness leaving my body. My father wanted a shark. Well, he was about to get a megalodon. When the polished steel doors slid open, I wasn't walking into a room, I was walking into my kingdom. Vanguard Legal Group did not smell like old cigars, and desperation like my father's office. It smelled of ozone and filtered air and aggressive ambition. The lobby was a cavern of white marble and floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking Central Park. The silence here was heavy and expensive, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of heels and the hum of servers processing billions of dollars in transactions. As soon as my Italian leather heel hit the floor, the hive came alive. It was a well-rehearsed ballet. 3 junior associates and my 2 executive assistants materialized out of nowhere, falling into step behind me in a perfect V formation. They did not ask how my morning was or why I was late. They knew better. In this building, time was the only currency that mattered, and I did not spend it on pleasantries. Sarah, my lead assistant, handed me a tablet without breaking stride. "The Tokyo market is closing up 2 points," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "The merger with Henderson is waiting for your signature on line 4. Senator Williams is on hold regarding the antitrust inquiry, and he says it is urgent." I took the tablet, scanning the numbers with a practiced eye. "Tell the senator I will call him back when he remembers who funded his re-election campaign," I said, my voice cool and steady. "And tell Henderson that if he changes the terms of the acquisition one more time, I will buy his competitor and drive him out of business by Christmas." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said, making a note. We swept past the rows of glass-walled offices where Ivy League graduates were billing $500 an hour just to review footnotes. Heads turned as I passed. Conversations stopped. People straightened their ties and shifted in their chairs. In the house in Scarsdale, I was the black sheep. I was the invisible girl who fetched champagne. But here I was, the sun around which this entire solar system revolved. They didn't see a woman who couldn't please her father. They saw the woman who had closed the biggest hostile takeover in New York history 3 months ago. I walked into my corner office. It was larger than my brother's entire apartment. 3 walls were pure glass, offering a panoramic view of the city that never sleeps. My desk was a slab of black obsidian devoid of clutter. I threw my blazer onto the white leather couch and rolled up the sleeves of my silk blouse. "Get Marcus in here," I said to the room at large. "Now." 30 seconds later, Marcus, my chief financial officer, walked in. Marcus was a brilliant man, a forensic accountant who could find a missing penny in a billion-dollar budget. He looked confused. He was holding a file that looked pitifully thin compared to the massive dossiers we usually handled. "Boss," he said, walking over to the desk. "I got your text." I pulled the preliminary numbers on Sterling and Sons. He placed the file on the obsidian desk. It looked like a dirty napkin sitting on a diamond. "I don't understand," Marcus said, adjusting his glasses. "Why are we looking at this? This firm is microscopic, Gabriel. Their revenue is down 40% year over year. Their assets are toxic. Their liabilities are a nightmare. They are bleeding cash so fast they will be dead in a week." He looked at me with genuine concern. "We usually eat companies like this for a snack and spit out the bones," he continued. "Why are we entertaining a meeting with them? Is this a charity case? Because if it is, we are better off just writing them a check and telling them to go away. Acquiring them is a liability." I walked over to the window and looked out at the skyline. I could see the Empire State Building standing tall and proud. I wondered if the architect who built it had a father who told him he would never amount to anything. "It is not a charity case, Marcus," I said quietly. "It is an execution." I turned back to face him. The confusion on his face deepened. "I want a full forensic autopsy on Sterling and Sons," I said, my voice dropping to a register that made the junior associates in the hallway shiver. "I want you to go back 10 years. I want to know every steak dinner expensed, every flight booked, and every single withdrawal from the client trust account." Marcus's eyes went wide. "The client trust account? That is heavy, boss. You think they are dipping into the funds? I don't think, Marcus. I know. I heard them admitting to it last night. My brother Trey has been using the Widow and Orphan Fund as his personal piggy bank. He bought a penthouse and a Bentley with money meant for cancer victims. Marcus let out a low whistle. That is federal prison time. That is disbarment. Exactly, I said, walking back to my desk and leaning forward, my hands resting on the cool stone. But I need the paper trail. I need the smoking gun. I need you to find the exact transfers, the dates, and the amounts. I want a dossier so thick and so damning that when I drop it on this table, it sounds like a gavel banging a death sentence. Marcus nodded, his demeanor shifting from confused to predatory. He opened his laptop and started typing furiously. I can have the bank records in an hour, he said. If they are sloppy, and guys like this are always sloppy, I will have the evidence of wire fraud by lunch. But Gabrielle, I have to ask. He paused, looking up at me. If the goal is to expose them, why bring them in for a merger meeting? Why not just send the file to the FBI and be done with it? Why bring them into your house? I picked up the thin file he had brought in. It had the logo of Sterling and Sons on the cover. The logo my father was so proud of. The legacy he claimed I wasn't good enough to carry. Because I don't just want them to go to jail, Marcus. I said, my eyes hardening into flint. I want them to know who sent them there. I want them to sit in this office and realize that the girl they mocked, the girl they used, the girl they tried to trick into financial ruin, is the one holding the axe. I tossed the file back onto the desk, and I want to own it. I want to own the name. I want to own the building. I want to own the very legacy they said I was unworthy of. Marcus stood up, closing his laptop. Okay, he said. I will get the team on it. We will tear them apart digit by digit. But what is the offer price? The board is going to ask why we are buying a bankrupt criminal enterprise. We need a number to put on the term sheet. I smiled. It was the first real smile I had smiled all day. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf that has just cornered a wounded deer. $1, I said. Marcus blinked. $1. $1, I repeated. I want to buy their entire lives, their history, their arrogance, and their future for one single dollar. Prepare the contract, Marcus, and make sure the font is large enough for my father to read without his glasses. I want him to see exactly what he is worth to me. It took exactly 3 seconds for the email to travel from my secure server on the 50th floor of the Vanguard building to the dusty, outdated computer terminal on my father's desk in Scarsdale. I watched my executive assistant, Sarah, press the enter key with a manicured finger. She looked up at me with a question in her eyes. She knew I was buying a worthless company. She knew I was overpaying even at $1 considering the legal mess I was inheriting. But she didn't ask why. She just did her job. Subject: acquisition proposal regarding Sterling and Sons. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window looking down at the traffic crawling along Fifth Avenue. I imagined the scene playing out across town. I knew my father's email notification sound. It was a loud, obnoxious chime that he refused to turn down because he wanted everyone in the office to know he was important enough to receive mail. I checked my Patek Philippe watch. 10 minutes passed, then 15. My phone on the obsidian desk began to vibrate. It was Reginald. I let it ring 3 times. In business, power is determined by who waits for whom. I picked it up on the 4th ring, just before it went to voicemail. Hello, Father, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Gabrielle shut up and listened to me. His voice was booming. It was wet with excitement and what sounded like expensive scotch. He wasn't calling to ask how I was, he was calling to gloat. Did you see the news? Oh, wait, of course you didn't. You are probably busy defending some shoplifter in night court. He laughed, a harsh barking sound. We did it, Gabby. We finally did it. Vanguard Legal Group just sent over the letter of intent. They want to meet tomorrow morning to finalize the acquisition. I leaned back against my desk, picking up a crystal paperweight. Is that so? I said. That is surprising considering the firm's financial state. Don't be jealous, Gabrielle. It is ugly. Trey's voice suddenly cut in from the background. He must have been on speakerphone. He sounded euphoric. Jealousy is a bad look on you, sis. You see, this is what happens when you have vision. Vanguard isn't looking at the balance sheet. They are looking at the brand. They are looking at the legacy. They know that buying Sterling and Sons gives them credibility in the old money circles. They need us. I nearly laughed out loud. Vanguard represented sovereign wealth funds and Fortune 500 tech giants. We didn't need credibility from a boutique firm in the suburbs that hadn't won a major case since the 90s. But I let him ramble. They are stupid, Trey continued. I bet I can get 10 million out of them. Maybe 12. I did a quick Google search on their managing partner. Nobody knows much about him. He keeps a low profile. Probably some insecure number cruncher I can bully into submission. I am going to walk into that room and demand a premium for the intellectual property. Intellectual property. Trey thought his half-baked legal theories were intellectual property. So why are you calling me? I asked, cutting through their self-congratulatory delusions. If you are about to be rich, why bother with the failure of the family? Silence on the other end. Then my father spoke again, his tone shifting to that patronizing command I knew so well. Because we need an assistant, Gabby. I gripped the paperweight tighter, my knuckles turning white. Excuse me? I asked. Our paralegal called in sick, Reginald said. Probably knew we were selling and decided to quit early. Ungrateful staff. Anyway, we need someone to handle the administrative grunt work during the meeting. Taking notes, pouring water, handing out copies of the prospectus. You know the simple stuff. He paused, waiting for me to thank him for the opportunity. I want you to come with us tomorrow, he continued. It will be a good learning experience for you. You can see how real lawyers operate in the big leagues. You can watch your brother negotiate a multi-million-dollar deal. Maybe you will pick up a few tips that will help you get out of that public defender hole you have dug for yourself. Trey chimed in again. Yeah, and dress appropriately, Gabby. Don't wear that cheap suit you had on last night. Try to look professional. We don't want the Vanguard people thinking we are related to the help. Just sit in the back, keep your mouth shut, and make sure my water glass stays full. I get thirsty when I am crushing people in negotiations. I closed my eyes. The image was so clear. They wanted to march me into my own company. They wanted me to sit in the corner of my own boardroom while they tried to hustle me. They wanted to reduce me to a servant in the one place where I reigned as a queen. It was the ultimate insult, and it was the perfect trap. If I refused, they would find some temp agency hire, and I would miss the look on their faces when I walked in. If I agreed, I would have to endure one last hour of their abuse. But the payoff would be legendary. Okay, I said softly. What was that? My father asked. Speak up. I said, okay, Dad, I will be there. Good, my father said. Be at the Vanguard Tower lobby at 8:45 sharp. Do not be late. And bring a notepad. A big one. You are going to want to write this down. Oh, I will, I whispered. I will write it all down. And Gabby Trey added. Don't try to talk to the managing partner. Don't try to network. These are serious people. They don't have time for small talk with someone at your level. Just let me do the talking. I have got this guy wrapped around my finger already. I looked at the empty chair at the head of the conference table in the adjacent room. The leather was imported from Italy. The wood was reclaimed teak. It was a throne. And Trey thought he was going to walk in and sit on it. I promise, Trey, I said, my voice sweet and deadly. I won't say a word until it is absolutely necessary. Great. See you tomorrow. Try to look successful for once. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and placed it gently on the desk. The silence of the office rushed back in. Sarah, my assistant, was standing in the doorway holding a tray of espresso. She had heard everything. Her face was pale. Ms. Sterling, she asked quietly, do you want me to alert security? Do you want me to have them barred from the building? I looked at her and shook my head. I stood up and walked over to the mirror hanging on the wall. I looked at the woman staring back. She was not the scared girl from Scarsdale. She was a titan of industry. She was a predator who had just been invited to dinner by her prey. "No, Sarah," I said, straightening my silk blouse. "Clear my schedule for tomorrow morning. Cancel the call with Tokyo. Tell the board of directors I am handling a personal acquisition." I turned back to the window, watching the city lights flicker on as evening approached. Somewhere out there, my father and brother were toasting to a fortune they would never see. They were buying things they couldn't afford. They were bragging to people who didn't care. "Let them come in," I said. "Let them come all the way into the spider's web. And make sure the air conditioning in the boardroom is set to 65 degrees. "Why 65? Sarah asked. "Because I want them to shiver," I said, "even before they realize they are naked." I walked back to my desk and picked up the red folder marked Sterling and Sons. Inside was the death warrant of their careers, the wire transfers, the forged signatures, the emails mocking clients. I ran my fingers over the edges of the paper. They want me to take notes. Fine. I will take notes. I will note the exact moment their hearts break. I will note the exact second the arrogance leaves their eyes. And I will note the precise time I foreclose on their souls. I checked my email one last time. The read receipt from my father's computer had just come through. Opened 5:42 p.m. The clock was ticking. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. I needed to get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow was going to be a very busy day. Tomorrow I wasn't just going to be a daughter or a sister. Tomorrow I was going to be the karma they never saw coming. The lobby of the Vanguard Tower is designed to intimidate. The ceilings soar 3 stories high, supported by columns of white marble that look like they belong in a Greek temple dedicated to the god of compound interest. The air is always cool and smells faintly of white tea and ozone. It is a space that whispers money rather than screaming it. I stood near the massive abstract sculpture in the center of the room, nursing a double espresso. I was wearing my armor. Not the humble black suit from the party, but a charcoal gray power suit tailored to within an inch of its life, paired with 4-inch stilettos that clicked on the marble with the precision of a metronome. I checked the time on my wrist. 8:43. They would be here any second. I watched the revolving doors spin, and then they arrived. My family walked into my sanctuary like tourists stumbling into a cathedral. My father, Reginald, led the pack. He was wearing his lucky navy suit, the one with the gold buttons that looked tacky under the modern lighting. He was clutching his leather briefcase so tightly his knuckles were white, looking around the vast lobby with a mixture of hunger and fear. Behind him was Trey, strutting like a rooster who had forgotten he was in a fox den. He was wearing sunglasses indoors, trying to look mysterious, but I knew he was just hiding the dark circles from last night's celebration. And then there was Tiffany. She was trailing behind them, holding her phone up at arm's length, filming herself. She was wearing a pink dress that was too short for a business meeting and too bright for a law firm. I could hear her voice echoing off the stone walls, even from 50 feet away. "Hey guys, it is Tiffany here, live from Manhattan. We are walking into Vanguard Legal right now to sign the deal of the century. My husband is basically buying this building today. Smash that like button if you want to see the view from the top." I took a sip of my coffee and waited. I did not hide. I stood right in their path. Trey was the first to spot me. He stopped so abruptly that Tiffany bumped into his back. He pulled off his sunglasses and squinted at me, his face contorting into a mask of confusion and instant irritation. He marched over to me, his footsteps heavy and clumsy compared to the silent glide of the associates passing by. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, getting right in my face. I lowered my coffee cup slowly. "Good morning to you too, Trey. Dad told me to come. Remember, to take notes." Trey looked around nervously, checking to see if anyone important had seen us. He lowered his voice to a venomous whisper. "I thought you would wait outside or use the service entrance. Look at you standing here in the middle of the lobby like you own the place." You are embarrassing me. If the partners see me talking to someone who looks like you, it ruins my image. I raised an eyebrow. Someone like me. You mean someone wearing a suit that fits? Don't get smart with me, Gabby, he snapped. You are lucky we even let you in the building. Now go find a corner and stay there until we are called. And hide that coffee cup. It looks unprofessional. Reginald had caught up to us by now. He looked me up and down, checking for flaws. At least you dressed somewhat decently today, he grumbled, adjusting his tie. But Trey is right. Don't draw attention to yourself. We are here to do business with sharks, Gabrielle. If they smell weakness, they will eat us alive. And you reek of mediocrity. I almost laughed. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. I will try to be invisible, Dad, I said. Tiffany pushed past Trey, her phone still recording. She turned the camera toward me without asking. And look who it is, guys. My sister-in-law Gabby made it. She is here to carry our bags, I guess. Say hi, Gabby. She shoved the phone in my face. I stared into the lens, my expression stone cold. Get that thing out of my face, Tiffany, I said quietly. You are violating the building's privacy policy. Tiffany rolled her eyes and lowered the phone, ending the stream. God, you are such a killjoy. No wonder you are single. She looked at the cup in my hand. It was an artisan latte from the cafe on the second floor, the one reserved for executives. Is that coffee? She asked. Yes. Give it to me, she said, holding out her hand. Excuse me, I asked. I said give it to me. I am parched. Talking to my followers takes a lot of energy. And honestly, this line at the reception desk is taking forever. She didn't wait for me to offer. She reached out and snatched the cup from my hand. It was a move of pure entitlement, a reflex born from years of taking things that didn't belong to her. She took a sip and immediately wrinkled her nose. Ugh, gross. It is black. Who drinks black coffee? I wanted a skinny vanilla latte with oat milk. She thrust the cup back at me, sloshing hot liquid onto the sleeve of my charcoal suit. Go get me a fresh one, she ordered, pointing toward the elevators. And make it quick. We have a meeting with the big boss in 10 minutes. I need to be caffeinated so I can help Trey count all our money. I looked at the brown stain on my cuff. It was silk. It would stain. I looked at Tiffany. She was tapping her foot, waiting for me to obey. She treated me like an assistant because that is all she could comprehend. In her world, people were either masters or servants. She had no idea she was speaking to the architect of her destruction. I looked at Trey and Reginald. They were watching, expecting me to run, expecting me to apologize. I took a deep breath. This was it. The final indignity. The final deposit in the bank of rage before I made the withdrawal. I am not getting you coffee, Tiffany, I said, my voice dropping an octave. And I am not wiping your shoes. And I am not carrying your bags. Trey stepped forward, his face flushing red. Do not start a scene, Gabrielle, he hissed. Not here. Do what she says. You are here to assist. That means you fetch. Now move before I call security and have you thrown out onto the sidewalk. Security, I repeated. Yes, security. You think they will believe you belong here? Look at us. We are the clients. You are just the baggage. I looked over Trey's shoulder. The head of security, Mike, was standing by the reception desk. He had been watching the whole interaction, his hand hovering near his radio, ready to intervene if I gave the signal. I gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head. Not yet, Mike. Not yet. I turned back to my family. You are right, Trey, I said, a small, dangerous smile playing on my lips. We shouldn't keep the partners waiting, and you definitely want to be on time for this meeting. I took the half-empty coffee cup from Tiffany's hand. I walked over to a nearby trash can, a sleek chrome cylinder, and dropped it in. It made a hollow thud. Let's go upstairs, I said, turning back to them. I have a feeling the managing partner is dying to meet you. Reginald checked his watch and straightened his jacket, puffing out his chest. Finally, he said, "Follow me," and Gabrielle stay 3 steps behind. He marched toward the elevators, bypassing the reception desk entirely because he assumed his importance was a sufficient entry pass. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, who I had hired personally, looked at them with confusion, then looked at me. I nodded. She buzzed them through the security gates. Trey smirked at me as the glass gates opened. "See?" he whispered. "I told you. I own this place already." We crowded into the elevator. It was a private car reserved for high-level meetings. The interior was mirrored. I watched their reflections. Reginald was practicing his handshake. Tiffany was checking her teeth for lipstick. Trey was sweating. I stood in the back corner, silent and still. My heart rate hadn't changed. My breathing was steady. The elevator started to rise. Whoosh! 10 floors, 20, 30. Trey looked at the button panel. "Top floor, huh?" he said nervously. "Penthouse level." This guy must really be loaded. "You have no idea," I whispered to myself. "What did you say?" Tiffany asked, snapping at me. I said, "The view is to die for." The elevator pinged as we passed the 40th floor. The pressure in the cabin changed. My ears popped. "You know, Gabby," my father said, looking at me in the reflection, his voice taking on that fake, benevolent tone. "If you behave yourself today, maybe I will let you handle the filing for the new company. It is minimum wage, but it is better than nothing. Consider it a favor." I looked at his eyes in the mirror. "Thank you, Daddy," I said. "But I don't think I will need a job after today." He laughed. "Dreaming big. That is cute. But let's be realistic. You are lucky to even be in this elevator." The car slowed. The digital display read 50. The doors slid open smoothly, revealing the Vanguard boardroom lobby. "Welcome to the top floor," I said, stepping out before them. Trey tried to grab my arm. "Hey, wait, back of the line. Dad goes first." I sidestepped him easily, my movement fluid and sharp. "Not today, Trey." I walked out onto the plush carpet of my domain. The air was colder up here, just as I had requested. 65 degrees. I walked toward the massive double doors of the boardroom. I didn't stop to ask for permission. I didn't stop to check in. "Where is she going?" Reginald hissed behind me. "Gabrielle, get back here. You are going to get us arrested for trespassing." I reached for the handles of the boardroom doors. They were heavy, solid oak. I pushed them open. "I am not trespassing, Dad," I said, my voice echoing in the silent hallway. I threw the doors wide open, revealing the long conference table, the panoramic view of the city, and the empty chair at the head of the table. "I am home." The double doors of the boardroom swung open, revealing a space that was less like a meeting room and more like a temple dedicated to absolute power. The room was vast, dominated by a 30-foot table made of a single slab of black walnut, imported from Brazil. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of Manhattan so clear it felt like you could reach out and crush the skyscrapers in your palm. The air was frigid, set exactly to 65 degrees, just as I had ordered. It was a temperature that kept minds sharp and weak men shivering. I ushered my family inside. They hesitated for a moment, struck dumb by the sheer scale of the wealth on display. This wasn't the dusty, cramped conference room of Sterling and Sons with its flickering fluorescent lights and stained carpet. This was the summit of the mountain. My father, Reginald, recovered first. He adjusted his tie, puffing out his chest, as if to physically inflate his importance to match the room. He marched in his footsteps, heavy and loud, on the plush carpet. "Now this," he boomed, his voice echoing slightly, "this is how you do business. Take note, Trey. This is what success looks like." Trey swaggered in behind him, grinning like a child who had just been given the keys to a candy store. He looked around, nodding approvingly at the artwork on the walls, original modern masters that cost more than his entire life's earnings. Tiffany trailed in the back, shivering slightly in her thin pink dress, her eyes darting around, assessing the value of everything she saw. I closed the heavy doors behind them, sealing us in. Around the black walnut table, 12 people were already seated. These were the senior partners of Vanguard Legal Group. Men and women I had handpicked for their ruthlessness and their brilliance. They were dressed in impeccable gray and navy suits, sitting perfectly still with their hands folded on the table in front of them. They did not smile. They did not stand up to greet us. They simply watched with eyes that had seen billion-dollar empires rise and fall. Reginald didn't seem to notice the predatory atmosphere. He mistook their silence for reverence. He walked up to the nearest empty chair on the side of the table and pulled it out with a flourish. "Gentlemen and ladies," he announced, extending a hand to Marcus, my CFO, who was sitting stone-faced on the right side. "I am Reginald Sterling, Reginald. It is an honor for you to meet me. I trust you have reviewed the prospectus. We are ready to make history today." Marcus did not shake his hand. He didn't even blink. He just stared at my father with a look of clinical detachment, the way a biologist looks at a specimen in a jar. "Please take a seat, Mr. Sterling." Marcus said, his voice flat. "The meeting will begin shortly." Reginald faltered for a second, his hand left hanging in the air. He coughed awkwardly, withdrawing his hand and smoothing his jacket. "Right. Yes. Down to business. I like that. No time for pleasantries." He sat down. Trey flopped into the chair next to him. To my horror, Trey kicked his legs out and rested his muddy designer sneakers on the edge of the pristine walnut table. He leaned back, linking his hands behind his head. "So who is the big boss?" Trey asked loudly, his voice grating in the quiet room. "Is he running late?" "Typical power move, right? Make the talent wait. I do that to my clients all the time. Shows them who is in charge." One of the senior partners, a woman named Eleanor with hair like steel wool, looked at Trey's shoes on the table. Her lip curled in microscopic disgust. "Kindly remove your feet from the furniture, Mr. Sterling," she said. "That table is an antique." Trey laughed, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. "Relax, sweetheart. When we sign this deal, I will own this table. I can dance on it if I want to." "Right, Dad?" Reginald chuckled nervously. "He is just high-spirited. He is a closer. You know how closers are. Aggressive." I stood by the door watching them dig their own graves. It was fascinating. They were so blinded by their own egos that they couldn't feel the noose tightening around their necks. "Gabrielle," my father snapped, turning his head to look at me. "Don't just stand there like a statue. Go find a pitcher of water and pour drinks for the partners. Make yourself useful, and grab a notepad. I want every word of my opening statement recorded." I didn't move. I looked at him, my face completely blank. "Did you hear me?" he hissed. "Water. Now," Trey chimed in. "Yeah, and make mine sparkling if they have it. None of that tap water garbage." I walked slowly toward the table. I could feel the eyes of my team on me. They were waiting for my signal. They were waiting for the moment the lioness would drop the disguise. I walked past the sideboard where the crystal water pitchers sat. I walked past the empty chairs at the far end of the table. "Where are you going?" Reginald asked, his voice rising in irritation. "The water is over there." I kept walking. The sound of my heels on the floor was a steady rhythmic countdown. Click, click, click. I reached the head of the table. The chairman's seat. It was a high-backed leather chair that resembled a throne. It was the only empty seat left in the room. Gabrielle Reginald warned, his face turning red. "Get away from there. That is the managing partner's seat. Are you out of your mind? You are going to get us thrown out." Trey laughed, shaking his head. "She thinks she is part of the board. Look at her. Gabby, get back to the corner. You are embarrassing the family." I stood behind the massive leather chair. I rested my hands on the top of the backrest, gripping the cool leather. I looked down the long expanse of the table. I looked at the 12 partners who reported to me. I looked at the terrified confusion starting to dawn on Tiffany's face. And finally, I looked at my father and brother. Marcus stood up. The movement was sharp and sudden. Immediately, the other 11 partners stood up in unison. The sound of their chairs sliding back was like a military maneuver. They stood tall, straightening their jackets, turning their bodies toward the head of the table. Toward me. Reginald looked around bewildered. Why is everyone standing? Is he here? Is the boss here? He craned his neck, looking toward the door I had just closed. Marcus looked directly at my father. His voice rang out clear and cold, filling the cavernous room. Mr. Sterling, please show some respect. You are in the presence of the managing partner of Vanguard Legal Group. Reginald looked at the door. Then he looked at Marcus. Then slowly, painfully, his eyes traveled to the head of the table. He looked at me. No, he whispered. The word escaped his lips like a dying breath. Trey sat up, his feet dropping from the table with a thud. What is going on? Who is the partner? Marcus gestured to me with an open hand. Ms. Gabrielle Sterling, founder and managing partner. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical weight pressing down on the room. I watched the color drain from my father's face. It didn't just fade. It vanished, leaving him gray and ashy. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. But no sound came out. Trey looked at me, then looked at the partners, then back at me. He let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. Good one. Very funny. Is this a prank? Did you pay these actors, Gabby? Come on, be serious. Where is the real boss? I didn't say a word. I simply pulled the chair back. The sound of the wheels on the floor was the only sound in the universe. I moved around to the front of the chair. I smoothed my charcoal skirt. And I sat down. I leaned back, resting my elbows on the armrests, and steepled my fingers in front of my face. I looked directly at my father over the tips of my fingers. Hello, Dad, I said softly. Reginald stared at me. His eyes were bulging. He looked like his brain was trying to process a mathematical impossibility. You, he stammered. You. Public defender. Basement office. You. I am the shark, Dad. I interrupted, my voice dropping to a temperature that matched the room. I am the predator. And you are sitting at my table. Tiffany let out a small squeak, covering her mouth with her hands. She looked down at the floor, realizing she had just ordered the owner of a billion-dollar company to clean up dog urine. Trey was shaking his head violently. No, no way. You are a secretary here or something. You are lying. You don't have the guts. You don't have the killer instinct. Dad, tell her to stop lying. I reached forward and pressed a button on the console built into the table. The massive screen behind me roared to life. It displayed the Vanguard logo, a silver shield on a black background. And underneath it, in bold white letters, it read, Managing Partner, Gabrielle Sterling. I looked at Trey. Killer instinct isn't about being loud, Trey, I said. It is about knowing when to strike. I opened the red folder in front of me. Now, I said, opening the first page. Let's talk about your exit strategy, or rather your lack of one. I watched them shrink. I watched them wither. They weren't arrogant men anymore. They were small, frightened children who had wandered into the deep, dark woods and just realized the wolf was wearing Grandma's clothes, and I was very, very hungry. I leaned back into the soft Italian leather of the chairman's seat, and for the first time in 24 hours, I allowed my muscles to relax. The chair was designed for power. It elevated the sitter just an inch higher than everyone else at the table, a subtle psychological trick I had learned from a mentor in Tokyo. I rested my elbows on the polished black walnut armrests and interlaced my fingers, waiting for the explosion. It did not take long. Reginald let out a sound that was half laugh and half choke. It was the sound of a man whose brain was frantically trying to reject the visual information in front of him. He stood up so abruptly that his chair screeched against the floor, disrupting the tomb-like silence of the boardroom. Gabby, have you lost your mind? He shouted, his face twisting into a mask of pure incredulity. Get up! Get up right now! Do you have any idea whose seat that is? That belongs to the managing partner. You are going to get us blacklisted before we even sign the deal. He looked frantically at the other partners, his eyes pleading for understanding. I apologize, everyone, he stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead. My daughter is... She has been under a lot of stress lately. I think she is having a breakdown. She doesn't mean any disrespect. She is just confused. He turned back to me, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Get your ass out of that chair, Gabrielle. I am not going to let your mental instability ruin my retirement. Go stand in the corner like I told you. Do you want security to drag you out? Is that what you want? Trey was shaking his head violently, looking at me with disgust. This is pathetic, Gabby, he sneered. You are actually pathetic. You think sitting in the big chair makes you important. You look like a child playing dress-up in Daddy's office. Get down before the real boss walks in and sues us for contaminating his furniture. And then there was Tiffany. As always, she saw an opportunity for content. I watched her pull her phone back out, her thumb hovering over the live button. She didn't see a tragedy. She saw a viral moment. Guys, you are not going to believe this, she narrated to her phone screen, her voice high and screechy. We are in the boardroom of a billion-dollar company, and my sister-in-law just snapped. She is literally hijacking the CEO's chair. She thinks she runs the place. Talk about delusional. This is what happens when you are single and bitter at 32. She panned the camera around the room, trying to capture the faces of my senior partners. Look at these lawyers, she continued. They are terrified of her crazy energy. Someone call a psych ward because... Slam! The sound was like a gunshot. Marcus, my chief financial officer, had brought his open palm down on the black walnut table with the force of a sledgehammer. The noise reverberated off the glass walls, shaking the water in the crystal pitchers. Tiffany stopped talking mid-sentence. Reginald froze, his mouth half open. Trey jumped in his seat, his knees hitting the underside of the table with a painful thud. The room went instantly silent. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. Marcus stood up slowly. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a face carved from granite. He did not look at Reginald. He did not look at Trey. He looked directly at the phone in Tiffany's hand. Put that device away, Mrs. Sterling, Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. You are recording inside a secure facility. That is a federal offense. Tiffany scrambled to lower the phone, her hands shaking. But Marcus wasn't finished. He turned his gaze to my father. And you, Mr. Sterling, you will lower your voice. You are a guest in this building, a guest who is currently behaving like a hooligan. Reginald puffed up his chest, trying to summon the last shreds of his dignity. Now see here, he sputtered, pointing a finger at Marcus. I am the client. I demand to speak to your boss. I will not be spoken to like this by a subordinate. I want the managing partner here right now. I want to report this incompetence, and I want my daughter removed from that chair immediately. Marcus looked at me. A small knowing glint appeared in his eye. He didn't smile, but I knew he was enjoying this. You want the managing partner? Marcus asked. Yes, Reginald shouted, slamming his hand on the table. I want the person in charge. I want G. Sterling. Marcus nodded slowly. Mr. Sterling, he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. You are speaking to her. He gestured to me with a wide, sweeping motion of his arm. May I introduce you to Ms. Gabrielle Sterling, founder, majority shareholder, and managing partner of Vanguard Legal Group. The words hung in the air, suspended in the freezing cold atmosphere of the room. For a moment, nobody moved. It was as if time had stopped. My father stared at me. He blinked once, twice. He looked at Marcus, waiting for the punchline. He looked at the other 11 partners sitting around the table. They were all looking at me with expressions of absolute deference and respect. He looked back at me. No, he whispered. The word came out as a squeak. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just stared back at him, my eyes boring into his soul. Yes, Dad, I said softly. Me. Trey let out a high-pitched laugh that sounded more like a sob. That is impossible, he said, his voice cracking. She is a public defender. She lives in a two-bedroom apartment. She drives a Honda. Dad, tell them they are lying. This is some kind of sick joke, right? You paid them to say this, didn't you, Gabby? You wasted your savings to hire actors to humiliate us. I reached into my blazer pocket. The movement was slow and deliberate. Every eye in the room followed my hand. I pulled out a business card. It was made of black metal with silver lettering. I slid it across the long, polished table. It spun perfectly, coming to a stop right in front of Trey. He looked down at it. He didn't want to pick it up. He looked at it like it was a poisonous spider, but he couldn't help himself. His trembling fingers reached out and touched the cold metal. Gabrielle Sterling, managing partner, Vanguard Legal Group. Trey dropped the card as if it burned him. His face, which had been flushed with anger a moment ago, drained of all color. He went pale, sickly pale, the kind of white you see on a corpse. He slumped back in his chair, his mouth hanging open, his eyes darting around the room, realizing that every insult he had thrown at me in the lobby, every mock, every jeer, had been delivered to the most powerful person in his world. Clatter. The sound came from Tiffany. Her phone slipped from her numb fingers and hit the hardwood floor. She didn't bend down to pick it up. She was staring at my wrist. At the Patek Philippe watch I had finally allowed to slide out from under my sleeve. She recognized it now. She recognized the suit. She recognized the power. "Oh my God," she whispered, pressing her hands to her mouth. "Oh my God, I made her clean up dog piss." Reginald was the last to fall. He was gripping the edge of the table so hard his fingernails were turning blue. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving. He looked at the room. The billion-dollar view, the army of lawyers, the sheer empire that surrounded him. And then he looked at the girl he had called a failure, the girl he had left out of his speeches, the girl he had tried to trick into debt. "You," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "You own this. I own all of it, Dad," I said, my voice steady and remorseless. "I own the building. I own the firm. And in about 10 minutes I am going to own you." His legs gave out. He collapsed back into his chair, not with the arrogance of a CEO, but with the heaviness of a man who has just realized he is standing on a trap door and the lever has already been pulled. The silence returned. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was electric. It was the sound of a predator standing over its prey, watching the life fade from its eyes. I opened the red folder in front of me. The sound of the paper turning was loud and crisp. "Shall we begin?" I asked, looking at my brother, who looked like he was about to vomit. "I believe you wanted to negotiate a higher price, Trey. 10 million, was it?" Trey didn't answer. He couldn't. "Good," I said. "Because the price has changed." I leaned forward, a shark smelling blood in the water. "And I don't think you are going to like the new number." The silence in the boardroom was not empty. It was heavy, like a physical weight pressing down on everyone's chest. My father looked like he had aged 20 years in 20 seconds. My brother Trey looked like a trapped animal searching for a hole in the fence. They were waiting for me to scream. They were waiting for me to yell at them for the years of neglect, the insults, the way they made me serve drinks at my own company party. But I did not scream. Screaming is for the powerless. I had the power, so I did not need to raise my voice above a whisper. I reached forward and pressed a single button on the console embedded in the black walnut table. The lights in the room dimmed automatically, and the massive 80-inch screen behind me roared to life. It cast a harsh, clinical blue glow over the faces of my family, highlighting the sweat beading on Trey's forehead and the terror in my father's eyes. "Let us look at the patient," I said, my voice devoid of warmth. I gestured to the screen where a complex financial graph was displayed. The lines on the graph were red, and they were all pointing sharply downward like a cliff face. "Slide 1, I announced. "The financial health of Sterling and Sons." I stood up and walked toward the screen holding a laser pointer. I didn't turn my back on them. I wanted to see every flinch. "You told the board of Vanguard that your firm was solvent, Dad. You claimed you had cash flow issues due to rapid expansion. You lied. I pointed the laser at a specific point on the chart 3 years prior. Sterling and Sons did not die today. It died 3 years ago. That was when you lost the Henderson account. Instead of downsizing, you took out high-interest loans to maintain your lifestyle. You kept the country club membership. You kept the leased Jaguars. You kept paying Trey a partner's salary even though he has not won a single case in 18 months. Reginald tried to stand up, but his legs wouldn't support him. He sank back down, clutching his chest. It is just a liquidity crunch. He wheezed, his voice thin and desperate. We have assets, the building, the brand name. Your building is mortgaged to 300% of its value. I cut him off sharply. And your brand name. The brand name is toxic. I pressed the button on the remote. The screen flickered and changed. The blue graphs were replaced by a spreadsheet. Rows and rows of numbers highlighted in angry neon yellow. Slide 2, I said. The client trust fund. A gasp went through the room. Not from my family, but from my partners. In the legal world, the trust account is sacred. It is the third rail. You touch it, and you die professionally. It is money that belongs to clients. Settlement checks, insurance payouts, funds held in escrow for widows and orphans. To steal from a trust fund is the ultimate sin. I turned my gaze to Trey. He was staring at the table, refusing to look at the screen. He knew what was coming. Trey looked at me, I commanded. He didn't move. Look at me. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed and watery. I walked over to him. I placed my hands on the table and leaned in. Do you want to explain to the board of Vanguard what these transactions are, Trey? I pointed to the screen. January 4th. $50,000 wired to vegasluck.com. February 12th. $100,000 wired to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, registered to a Mr. T. Sterling. March 3rd. $200,000 withdrawal cash. Trey was shaking so hard his teeth were actually chattering. The sound was pathetic, a soft clicking in the quiet room. I was going to put it back, he sobbed. It was a loan. I just needed to double it. I had a system. I was going to win it back and replace the money before the audit. Gambling. I said, my voice dripping with disgust. You stole $2.4 million from the victims of the chemical plant lawsuit. People who have cancer, Trey. People who needed that money for chemotherapy. And you blew it on online poker and sports betting. I turned to Tiffany. She was shrinking into her chair, trying to make herself invisible. And let us not forget the accomplice. I tapped the remote. The screen changed again, showing credit card statements. $75,000 at Hermes, $12,000 at the Four Seasons Spa, $5,000 for a dog birthday party. All paid for with the Sterling and Sons corporate card, which was funded by the stolen trust money. Tiffany let out a whimper. I didn't know she whispered, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. He told me it was his bonus. He told me we were rich. Ignorance is not a defense in federal court, Tiffany, I said coldly. You spent stolen money. That makes you a beneficiary of fraud. I turned off the screen. The sudden darkness made the room feel even colder. The only light came from the panoramic windows highlighting the empire I had built, the empire they had tried to steal. I walked back to the head of the table and sat down. I looked at Trey. He looked small. He looked like a child wearing a man's suit. Do you know what the sentencing guidelines are for wire fraud of this magnitude, Trey? I asked. He shook his head mutely. I leaned back, steeping my fingers. It is 20 years maximum per count, and I count 43 separate transactions. But since you are a first-time offender, and if you plead guilty immediately, you might get lucky. I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was agonizing. You are looking at minimum 15 years in federal prison, Trey. 15 years. Trey let out a sound like a wounded animal. He buried his face in his hands and began to weep loudly, uncontrollably. 15 years. I continued, my voice relentless. You will be almost 50 when you get out. Your wife will have divorced you years ago. Your friends will have forgotten you. You will have missed your children growing up if you ever have any. You will be nothing. Reginald finally found his voice. It was a broken, raspy whisper. Gabby, please. He is your brother. You can't let this happen. We can fix this. We can pay it back. I will sell the house. I will sell everything. You have nothing to sell, Dad, I said, looking at him with pity. The bank owns the house. The bank owns the car. You are destitute. You have been bankrupt for years, you just refuse to admit it. Reginald looked at me, tears spilling onto his expensive tie. But we are family, he pleaded. You are my daughter. You can't send your own brother to prison. It will destroy the legacy. I laughed. It was a sharp, short sound. The legacy, I repeated. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. You stood on a stage last night, Dad. You told 200 people that Trey was the future. You told them he had the killer instinct. You told them I was built for a supporting role. I turned back to face them, my silhouette framed by the skyline. Well, you were right. I am playing a supporting role. I am supporting the rule of law. And Trey has a killer instinct, all right. He killed your firm, he killed your reputation, and he killed your freedom. I walked back to the table and picked up the red folder. This is not a merger meeting anymore, I said. This is a crime scene. And I am the coroner. I looked at Marcus. Call the FBI, I said. They are waiting in the lobby. Send them up. No, Trey screamed, jumping up from his chair. No. Please, Gabby, don't. I will do anything. I will shine your shoes. I will clean your house. Just don't call the feds. I looked at him. The brother who had mocked me just an hour ago. The brother who had told me to fetch coffee. I don't need a shoeshine boy, Trey, I said. I have people for that. And they are honest. I looked at the door as it opened. 2 agents in dark suits stepped in. They had been waiting for my signal. I looked back at my father. You wanted me to take notes, Dad? I said, closing the folder. I tapped the cover of the file. Case closed. The silence in the room was shattered by a screeching sound that grated against the glass walls. It was Tiffany pushing her chair back, the legs scraping violently against the hardwood floor. She stood up, her face flushed a blotchy, ugly red that clashed with her pink dress. She was trembling, but it was not from fear anymore. It was from the sheer, unadulterated entitlement that had fueled her entire existence. You are lying, she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at me. Her voice cracked, echoing in the cavernous boardroom. You are twisting everything, Gabrielle. That money was not stolen. It was compensation. Trey is the senior partner. He is the face of the firm. He brings in the clients. He deserves that money. It is his salary. She looked around the room at the 12 stony-faced partners of Vanguard trying to find an ally. My husband works 80 hours a week, she pleaded, her logic twisting into a pretzel. He is under so much stress. He deserves to treat his family. Who cares if he borrowed a little from some account? He was going to put it back. You are making him sound like a criminal when he is just a provider. I watched her meltdown with a calm detachment. It was fascinating to see how deep the delusion went. She genuinely believed that stealing from cancer patients was justified because she wanted a new handbag. I did not raise my voice. I simply pressed the button on the console again. The screen behind me flickered. The spreadsheet of wire transfers disappeared, replaced by a digital copy of the American Express Centurion statement issued to Sterling & Sons. Let us discuss what you think your husband deserves, Tiffany. I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria like a scalpel. I stood up and walked toward the screen. The blue light cast long shadows across the table. This is the corporate credit card statement for the last fiscal year, I announced to the room. For those of you who do not know, tax law corporate expenses must be strictly business-related. They must be ordinary and necessary for the operation of the firm. I pointed the laser pointer at a line item near the top of the list. October 14th. Hermes of Paris, Madison Avenue, $50,420. I turned to look at Tiffany. She was breathing heavy, her chest heaving. The expense code entered for this transaction was client entertainment. I read from the report. I took a step closer to her. Who was the client, Tiffany? Which downtrodden victim of corporate negligence did you entertain by buying a limited edition Birkin bag? Or was the client you? Because I noticed you were carrying a brand new ostrich skin bag when you walked in here today. The one you made sure to put on the table so everyone could see. Tiffany instinctively grabbed her purse, pulling it into her lap as if to hide it. That was a gift, she stammered. Trey gave it to me for our anniversary. I nodded slowly. A gift. Purchased with company funds. Classified as a tax-deductible business expense. That is called tax fraud, Tiffany. And since you are the one holding the bag, literally, that makes you in possession of stolen property. I pressed the button again. The screen scrolled down. November 2nd. The Pause and Relax Luxury Pet Spa. $12,000. I let that number hang in the air. $12,000. I looked at the partners. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Eleanor shook her head in disbelief. $12,000 for a dog? I said, my voice dripping with disdain. The expense code listed is office security. I laughed, a cold, sharp sound. You classified your Chihuahua's mud bath and blueberry facial as a security expense. Is Princess a guard dog, Tiffany? Is that trembling rat you keep in your purse protecting the firm's assets? Tiffany bit her lip, her eyes darting around the room. She has anxiety, she whispered. The vet said she needs hydrotherapy. I walked back to the head of the table. You made me clean up that dog's urine this morning, Tiffany. You stood there in your silk robe and watched the managing partner of a $3 billion company scrub a rug because you were too lazy to do it yourself. You treated me like a servant while you were spending more on that dog's grooming than most families spend on groceries in a year. I leaned forward, placing my hands on the black walnut table. But this next one, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. This is my favorite. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen highlighted a transaction from 3 months ago. The School of Affluence. Online course. $5,000. The room was dead silent. Even Trey looked up from his hands, confused. I read the description out loud. How to marry a multi-millionaire and live the high society lifestyle. A masterclass in elegance and hypergamy. I looked at Tiffany. Her face went from red to a ghostly white. This was the ultimate humiliation. It wasn't just greed. It was proof that she was a fraud. Proof that she had to pay someone to teach her how to act like she belonged in the world she was so desperate to enter. You categorize this as continuing legal education, I said. You told the IRS that learning how to trap a rich husband was necessary for the legal practice of Sterling and Sons. Tiffany slumped back in her chair. She looked small. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terror of a child who has been caught stealing candy. I walked over to where she was sitting. I stood over her, casting a shadow over her pink dress. You said Trey earned this money, I said quietly. You said he deserves it. I pointed at the screen. This is not a salary, Tiffany. This is embezzlement. This is grand larceny. And because you signed the credit card receipts, because your name is on the supplementary card, and because you are the direct beneficiary of these fraudulent purchases, you are not just a wife. I leaned down so my face was inches from hers. I could smell her expensive perfume, the scent of fear masking the floral notes. You are a co-conspirator. You are an accomplice. Tiffany shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, she sobbed. I didn't know. He handles the finances. I just swiped the card. I am just a housewife. You can't send me to jail. I am pretty. I can't go to jail. I stood up straight, smoothing my blazer. The IRS does not care if you are pretty, Tiffany. They care if you can pay. And considering you spent all the money on dog spas and handbags, I don't think you can. I looked at Marcus. Add Mrs. Sterling to the FBI report, I said. tax evasion, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. No, Tiffany screamed. She turned on Trey, grabbing the lapels of his jacket and shaking him violently. Do something, she shrieked. Tell her you did it. Tell her I didn't know. You said we were rich. You lied to me, you useless, pathetic liar. Trey sat there limp as a rag doll, letting his wife shake him. He had no fight left. I watched them turn on each other. The rats were eating the ship. It is too late for that, I said, turning my back on them and walking toward the window. The train has already left the station, and you are both tied to the tracks. I looked out at the city, listening to Tiffany's hysterical sobbing and Trey's pathetic whimpering. It was the sweetest music I had ever heard. But I wasn't done. I had one more nail to drive into the coffin, one final lesson to teach my father about value. I turned back to the room. Now, I said, let's talk about the buyout price. I believe I promised you an offer. The silence in the boardroom was no longer the silence of negotiation. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a funeral. My father sat slumped in his chair. The arrogance that had defined him for 60 years had evaporated, leaving behind a small, trembling old man. He looked at the screen, where the evidence of his son's crimes was still glowing in harsh blue light. Then he looked at me. His eyes were not angry anymore. They were wet with a pathetic desperation that turned my stomach. Gabby, he whispered. His voice cracked, breaking the stillness. Please. He reached a shaking hand across the table toward me. It was the first time in my life he had reached out to me, not to strike or to take, but to beg. You cannot do this, he pleaded. You cannot destroy your own family. We are blood, Gabby. We are the same flesh. I am your father. I raised you. I put a roof over your head. I watched his hand hovering in the air. I did not take it. You put a roof over my head, I repeated quietly. And then you tried to trick me into signing a document that would have taken that roof away. You tried to make me homeless to save your golden child. Reginald shook his head, tears spilling onto his cheeks. I was desperate, he sobbed. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But you can fix this. You are powerful now. I see that. You are the managing partner. You can bury this. You can make the files disappear. Just delete the records, Gabby. Write a check to the trust fund. No one has to know. He leaned forward, his eyes wide and manic. Do it for the family name. Do it for your mother. Do not let your brother rot in prison. He will not survive in there. He is soft. They will eat him alive. I looked at Trey. He was huddled in his chair, rocking back and forth, crying into his hands. My father was right. Trey was soft. He had been softened by a lifetime of unearned praise and protected by a shield of money that wasn't his. I stood up and walked slowly around the table. My heels sank into the plush carpet, making no sound. I stopped behind my father's chair. You said something to me yesterday, Dad. I said, my voice calm and conversational. You said I would never be a real lawyer. You said I didn't have the killer instinct. You said the law was about power. Reginald flinched as if I had hit him. I was wrong, he whimpered. I was wrong about everything. You are the best lawyer in the family. You are a shark. I shook my head. No, Dad, you are still not listening. I walked to the window and looked down at the street 50 stories below. The traffic was a river of yellow cabs and black sedans. You think being a real lawyer means manipulating the truth, I said without turning around. You think it means bullying and hiding and stealing. That is why you are failing. That is why you are sitting in that chair, and I am standing here. I turned back to face them. A real lawyer respects the law, Dad. A real lawyer understands that the law is the only thing that separates civilization from chaos. And a real lawyer has ethical obligations that supersede biology. I walked back to the table and placed my hand on the red file. It is called mandatory reporting, I said. Reginald looked confused. Mandatory what? Rule 8.3 of the Rules of Professional Conduct. I recited, my voice taking on the cadence of a judge passing sentence. A lawyer who knows that another lawyer has committed a violation of the rules of professional conduct that raises a substantial question as to that lawyer's honesty, trustworthiness, or fitness, as a lawyer in other respects, shall inform the appropriate professional authority. I looked directly into my father's eyes. Shall inform Dad, not may inform, not can inform if they feel like it. Shall. It is not a choice. It is a duty. Reginald's face went gray. But you are the boss, he stammered. You make the rules. I am the managing partner, I corrected him. Which means my fiduciary duty is to this firm and to the integrity of the legal profession. If I bury this evidence, if I cover up Trey's theft, I become an accessory after the fact. I would lose my license. I would lose this firm. I would lose everything I built. I leaned in close. And do you really think I am going to sacrifice my life, my career, and my reputation to save the people who treated me like a servant? Do you think I am going to go to jail for the brother who made me fetch his coffee? Reginald buried his face in his hands. Oh God, he moaned. Oh God. Then a sound cut through the room. It started faint at first, a low wail rising from the concrete canyons of Manhattan. But it grew louder and louder until it was unmistakable. Sirens. Not just one siren. A chorus of them. Trey's head snapped up. He looked at the window, his eyes wide with terror. What is that? He whispered. Tiffany stopped crying and ran to the window. She pressed her face against the glass, leaving a smudge of makeup on the pristine surface. There are police cars down there, she screamed. There are so many police cars. They are blocking the entrance. She turned to me, her face a mask of accusation and horror. Did you call them? I looked at my watch. It was 9:25. I checked the time. Actually, I said checking the date on my Patek Philippe. I didn't call them just now. I looked at Trey. I called the Federal Bureau of Investigation at 8 o'clock this morning. Before you even arrived at the building. Before you drank my coffee. Before you sat in my chair. Trey let out a strangled cry. You set us up. I nodded. I sent the forensic audit to Special Agent Miller an hour ago. He specializes in white-collar crime and wire fraud. He was very interested in the Cayman Island transfers. In fact, he told me that with the amount of evidence we provided, this is going to be the easiest conviction of his career. Reginald stared at me. He looked like he was looking at a stranger, a monster. You called the FBI on your own brother, he whispered, before gave us a chance to explain. There is nothing to explain, Dad, I said, picking up the remote control for the screen. The numbers do not lie. The bank records do not lie. I pressed a button and the screen went black, plunging the room back into the natural light of the morning. I told you I was going to buy your company for $1, I said, walking toward the door. But I lied about one thing. I stopped with my hand on the brass handle. I am not buying it to save it. I am buying it to liquidate it. I am going to sell the furniture. I am going to sell the client list. I am going to sell the building, and every single penny will go to repaying the victims of the chemical plant lawsuit. I opened the door. My assistant Sarah was standing there. She looked pale but resolute. The agents are in the elevator, Ms. Sterling, she said. They will be here in 30 seconds. Thank you, Sarah, I said. I turned back to my family one last time. You wanted a legacy, Dad, I said. You wanted the name Sterling to mean something. Well, congratulations. It is going to be famous. It is going to be the name on the landmark legal case for trust fund fraud in the state of New York. Law students will study United States versus Sterling for generations. Reginald slumped forward, his head hitting the expensive walnut table with a hollow thud. Trey began to hyperventilate, clawing at his tie, as if it were a noose. Tiffany sank to the floor in a pile of pink chiffon, weeping over her ruined life. I stepped out into the hallway and let the heavy oak doors close behind me. I did not stay to watch the arrest. I did not need to. I had a company to run. And for the first time in my life, the air in the hallway did not feel heavy. It felt light. It felt clean. It felt like justice. The sound of the elevator bell arriving on the 50th floor was soft, but in that silent boardroom, it sounded like a gavel banging down on a death sentence. Ping. Just a single note, but it shattered the last remnants of denial holding my family together. The heavy oak doors I had closed moments ago were the only thing separating the Sterling family from federal custody. Tiffany was the first to move. Survival instinct is a powerful thing, and Tiffany had the survival instinct of a cockroach in a nuclear winter. She looked at the closed doors where the agents were waiting, and then she looked at my brother. The look of adoration she usually saved for his credit card was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated hatred. She realized in that split second that the ship was sinking, and she had no intention of drowning with the captain. She clawed at her left hand. Her manicure dug into her skin as she ripped the 3-carat diamond engagement ring off her finger. The ring that Trey had bought with stolen trust fund money. The ring she had flaunted in my face for years as proof of her superior status. She didn't hand it to him. She threw it. It struck him right in the cheek with a sharp crack, leaving a red welt, before bouncing onto the black walnut table and spinning to a stop near my hand. "You liar!" she screamed, her voice shredding the air. "You told me it was legal. You told me it was a bonus. You useless, pathetic little man." Trey looked up at her, blinking through his tears, completely stunned by the betrayal. "Tiff," he whimpered, reaching out a hand. "Baby, please, we are in this together." "Don't you touch me," she shrieked, recoiling as if he were contagious. "We are not together. I am filing for divorce this morning. I am not going to jail for you. I am not ruining my life because you are too stupid to steal correctly." She spun around to face the door, smoothing her pink dress, trying to compose a mask of innocence. She was rehearsing her lines for the FBI agents before they even walked in. I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was going to play the victim, the naive trophy wife who was manipulated by her evil husband. I watched her with a cold detachment. It wouldn't work. The forensic audit I had sent to Agent Miller showed her signature on the credit card receipts right next to the expense codes. She could throw the ring, but she couldn't throw away the paper trail. Trey didn't even wipe the blood from his cheek where the diamond had cut him. He crumbled. The swaggering hotshot lawyer who had put his feet on my table was gone. In his place was a terrified little boy. He scrambled out of his chair, falling to his knees and crawling toward the only protector he had ever known. "Daddy," he sobbed, his voice high and thin. "Daddy, do something. Don't let them take me. I can't go to prison. I am scared. Fix it. You always fix it." He grabbed Reginald's legs, burying his face in his father's expensive trousers, ruining the fabric with his snot and tears. He clung to him like a toddler waking up from a nightmare, expecting his father to wave a magic wand and make the monsters go away. But Reginald Sterling had no magic left. My father looked down at his sobbing son. He looked at the ring spinning on the table. He looked at Tiffany, who was now pacing near the window, muttering to herself. And then he looked at me. He saw me standing at the head of the table, calm and untouched. He saw the Vanguard logo glowing on the screen behind me. He saw the red folder under my hand. And he realized he had lost. He had lost the company. He had lost the money. He had lost the legacy. And now he was about to lose his freedom. The weight of it was too much for his ego to bear. He couldn't face the humiliation of being handcuffed in front of the daughter he had called a failure. He couldn't face the reality of his own incompetence. So he played the only card he had left, the sympathy card. He gasped loudly. It was a theatrical sound, a desperate intake of air. He clutched his chest with his left hand, gripping his lapel so hard the fabric tore. "Oh, my heart," he groaned. His face twisted into a grimace. "The pain. I am having an attack." He slumped forward, sliding out of his chair and collapsing onto the floor next to Trey. It was a dramatic fall. Too dramatic. He made sure to land on the thick plush carpet, avoiding the hard legs of the table. "Dad," Trey screamed, shaking him. "Dad, wake up! Help! Someone help him! He is dying!" Tiffany stopped pacing and looked over, but she didn't move to help. She just looked annoyed that his medical emergency might delay her interview with the police. Reginald lay on the floor breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. His eyes were squeezed shut, but I noticed his eyelids fluttering. I noticed that his color was still flushed, not the pale gray of cardiac arrest. I noticed that he had positioned himself perfectly so that when the FBI walked in, they would see a fallen patriarch instead of a criminal. I walked slowly around the table. I stood over them. The tableau was almost Shakespearean in its tragedy. The weeping son, the screaming wife, the dying father. A perfect performance of a family destroyed. But I had seen this play before. I knew the actors. And I knew Reginald Sterling's heart was too cold to ever actually fail him. I looked down at him lying on the floor. "You can stop acting, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through Trey's wailing. "The ambulance will take 20 minutes. The FBI is here now, and federal agents know how to check a pulse." Reginald's eyes snapped open. For a second, the mask slipped and I saw the pure venom in his gaze. He hated me. He hated me because I saw through him. He hated me because I was the only one in the room who wasn't buying his ticket. "You are a monster," he hissed, abandoning the fake heart attack for a moment. "You would let your father die on the floor." "I am not a monster, Dad," I replied, checking my watch. "I am a lawyer, and I know that faking a medical emergency to delay arrest is considered obstruction of justice. That is another 5 years on your sentence." The heavy doors opened. 2 agents in dark windbreakers walked in. They didn't look like they were there to negotiate. They looked like they were there to take out the trash. Reginald squeezed his eyes shut again, resuming his groaning. Trey tried to hide behind his father's prone body. Tiffany threw her hands in the air, surrendering before anyone even asked her to. I stepped back, giving the agents room to work. "That is them," I said, pointing to the pile of broken people on the floor. "The evidence is on the table. The confessions are recorded. And the ringmaster of this circus is the one pretending to be unconscious." As the agents moved in, pulling Trey away from his father and snapping cuffs on his wrists, I turned away. I walked back to the head of the table and sat down in the managing partner's chair. I picked up the diamond ring Tiffany had thrown. I held it up to the light. It was beautiful. It was flawless. And it was cold. Just like the family I was leaving behind. The silence returned to the boardroom, but it was different now. It was not the silence of anticipation, nor was it the silence of shock. It was the hollow, echoing silence of a tomb. The FBI agents had left, taking my screaming brother and his hysterical wife down the freight elevator. My father Reginald sat alone at the massive walnut table. He looked small. The heart attack performance was over, replaced by the crushing reality of total defeat. He stared at the empty chairs where his golden child had sat just moments ago, realizing that his legacy was being fingerprinted and booked into a federal detention center. I walked over to my spot at the head of the table. I did not sit down. I did not offer him a tissue. I picked up a single sheet of paper from my briefcase. It was the acquisition agreement I had prepared days ago. I slid it across the polished wood. It glided smoothly and stopped right in front of him, next to his trembling hands. "This is your only way out, Dad," I said, my voice flat and businesslike. "Trey is going to prison, but the Sterling name does not have to be completely destroyed. I am willing to buy the firm. I will use my capital to repay every cent Trey stole from the client trust fund. The cancer victims will get their money. The widows will be made whole." He looked up, hope flickering in his watery eyes. He thought for a second that I was showing mercy. He thought I was saving him. "You would do that," he whispered. "You would save the company." I shook my head slowly. "I am not saving the company, Dad. I am burying it. I am buying the assets to liquidate them. But I am offering you a choice. You can let the bank foreclose on everything and leave you on the street, or you can sign this." I reached into my purse and pulled out a single crisp dollar bill. I placed it on top of the contract. George Washington stared up at him. $1, I said. "That is the valuation. Take it or leave it." Reginald stared at the bill. $1. The price of a pack of gum, the price of his life's work. But there are conditions. I continued, pointing to the paragraph at the bottom of the page. Clause 4. You retire effective immediately. You surrender your bar license. And you vacate your house by tomorrow morning. Since the bank is taking it anyway, I have arranged a room for you. I paused, letting him think for a moment that I might be sending him to a luxury estate. At the Shady Pines Retirement Community, I said, it is a mid-level facility, clean, adequate, and affordable on a state pension. You will have a roommate and bingo night is on Tuesdays. He recoiled as if I had slapped him. A nursing home, he gasped. But I am Reginald Sterling. I belong in a country club. Not anymore, I said coldly. You are an accomplice to fraud with no assets and no home. Shady Pines is more than you deserve. I leaned in closer, my hands resting on the table. And the final condition, absolute no contact. You will never call me. You will never write. You will never show up at my building. You will never claim me as your daughter again. To you, I am just the stranger who bought your failure for $1. Reginald looked at the pen. The gold Mont Blanc he had tried to force me to use yesterday to sign my own death warrant. He picked it up. His hand shook so badly the signature looked like a seismograph of an earthquake. He was signing away his life, his legacy, his power. He finished and pushed the paper back to me. He looked broken. He looked like a man who had finally realized that the daughter he threw away was the only one who could have saved him. I took the document. I took the pen. And I left the dollar bill on the table. Transaction complete, I said. I turned my back on him and walked toward the door, leaving him alone with his $1 bill and the ghost of his arrogance. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting tight was the only noise in the room. It was a sharp mechanical click that signaled the end of the Sterling dynasty. I watched as the two federal agents hauled my brother to his feet. Trey was no longer the arrogant lawyer who had put his muddy sneakers on my table. He was a weeping mess. His legs were so weak with terror that the agents practically had to carry him. He looked back at me one last time, his eyes pleading for a salvation that was never coming. Gabrielle, please, he sobbed. I am your brother. Don't let them take me. I did not blink. I did not look away. I simply watched him disappear into the hallway. Tiffany followed him, not in handcuffs, but flanked by an agent who was escorting her out for questioning. She held her head high, trying to salvage some shred of dignity, but her mascara was running in black streaks down her face, and her pink dress looked cheap and wrinkled. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. The shame was too great. As they passed through the glass doors of the boardroom and into the main lobby of the 50th floor, the entire Vanguard staff was waiting. Sarah had not told them to gather, but they knew. News travels fast in a shark tank. 50 of the brightest legal minds in New York stood in silence watching the procession. They didn't jeer. They didn't laugh. They just looked. They looked at the crying man and the hysterical woman with the cold, detached judgment of professionals witnessing a train wreck. My father was the last to leave. He stood up slowly, clutching the signed contract to his chest like a life raft. He looked at the empty room. He looked at the view of the city he used to think he owned. And then he looked at me. I expected him to curse me. I expected him to scream. But he didn't. He just looked at me with a profound, terrifying emptiness. He was a king without a kingdom, a father without children, a man without a name. "Goodbye, Dad," I said softly. He didn't answer. He turned and walked out the door. His shoulders slumped, his gait shuffling and old. He walked past his weeping son and his furious daughter-in-law. He walked past the security guards. He walked into the elevator and the doors slid shut, cutting him out of my life forever. The room was suddenly very quiet. Sarah stepped into the doorway. "Ms. Sterling," she asked gently, "do you need anything? Should I call maintenance to clean the room?" I looked at the black walnut table. I looked at the spot on the carpet where my father had feigned a heart attack. I looked at the diamond ring still sitting on the wood. "No, Sarah," I said. "Leave it for now. I just need a moment. She nodded and closed the heavy oak doors, leaving me alone in my sanctuary. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. 50 stories down the world was carrying on. Yellow taxis wove through traffic like beetles. People were rushing to lunch, rushing to meetings, rushing to lives that were messy and complicated. But up here the air was still. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. I waited for the guilt to hit me. I waited to feel bad about sending my brother to prison and my father to a nursing home. I waited for the childhood programming to kick in the voice that said family comes first no matter what. But the guilt never came. Instead, I felt lighter. It was as if I had been carrying a backpack filled with stones for 32 years, and someone had finally cut the straps. The air entered my lungs deeper than it ever had before. My shoulders dropped, the tension in my neck vanished. I turned away from the window and walked back to the head of the table. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number I called every Sunday, but today was Tuesday. It rang twice. "Hello?" A warm voice answered. It was the sound of cookies baking in the oven. It was the sound of unconditional love. It was my mother. "Hey, Mom," I said. My voice trembled slightly, not from sadness, but from relief. "Gabby," she said, sounding surprised. "Is everything okay? You never call during work hours. Are you in trouble?" I laughed. A real laugh this time. Not the cold, calculated laugh I had used on my father. "No, Mom," I said. "I am not in trouble. I am actually really great." I sat down in the managing partner's chair. It felt comfortable now. It felt like mine. "I just wanted to tell you something," I said. "Do you remember that old building Dad used to brag about? The one downtown where he started the firm?" "Yes, I remember," she said with a sigh. "That place was a money pit." "Why do you ask?" "Well," I said, leaning back and looking up at the ceiling, "I just bought it." There was a pause on the other end. "You bought it?" she asked. "I bought the whole thing, Mom. The building, the firm, the brand, all of it." I heard her gasp. "Oh my God, Gabby, that is incredible. But what about your father? What about Trey?" I looked at the empty chairs. "They decided to retire early," I said. "It was a sudden decision. They are going away for a while." I didn't need to tell her the details yet. There would be time for that later. Tonight was for celebration. "Mom, get dressed up," I said. "Put on that blue dress I bought you. I am sending a car to pick you up in an hour. We are going to Le Bernardin." "Le Bernardin," she exclaimed. "Gabby, that is too expensive. We can just go to the diner." "No, Mom," I said firmly. "We are not going to the diner. We are going to the best restaurant in the city. And we are going to order the tasting menu with the wine pairing, because we have a lot to celebrate." I hung up the phone. I sat there for a minute longer, just soaking it in. The silence was no longer lonely. It was peaceful. I stood up and smoothed my charcoal suit. I picked up the red folder containing the evidence that had liberated me. I walked to the shredder in the corner of the room. I fed the papers in one by one. The machine whirred, turning the ugly truth of my family into meaningless confetti. I didn't need the evidence anymore. The FBI had their copies. The past was gone. I walked to the door and opened it. The office was buzzing with activity. Phones were ringing. People were typing. The empire was running. I walked past Sarah's desk. "Sarah," I said. "Yes, Ms. Sterling. Have maintenance come in and change the locks on the boardroom doors." And Sarah, "Yes, ma'am. Get rid of that chair at the head of the table. It is a little too old-fashioned for my taste. Order something new, something modern, something that looks like the future." Sarah smiled. "Consider it done." I walked toward the elevator, my heels clicking on the marble with a sound that said I had arrived. They say blood is thicker than water. It is a lie people tell to keep you trapped in toxic cycles. They use it to make you forgive the unforgivable. They use it to make you set yourself on fire to keep them warm. But standing in that elevator watching the numbers go down, I realized the truth. Blood is just biology. Family is who stands by you when you are nothing. Family is who claps for you when you win. Family is respect. My father and brother shared my DNA, but they never shared my heart. They were a cancer, and today I had performed the surgery. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby. The sun was streaming in through the glass, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I stepped out onto the street. The noise of the city rushed over me like a wave. It was loud and chaotic and beautiful. I took a deep breath of the exhaust-filled air. It tasted like victory. I am Gabrielle Sterling. I am a daughter. I am a sister. But most importantly, I am free. And as I hailed a cab to go pick up my mother, the only parent who truly mattered, I knew one thing for certain. I would never serve anyone a drink ever again. Unless I was pouring a toast to my own success. The story of how I dismantled my toxic family was over. The story of Gabrielle Sterling was just beginning. This story serves as a powerful reminder that our worth is never defined by the people who fail to see it, even if those people are our own family. Gabrielle's journey proves that toxic loyalty is a trap, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is break the cycle of abuse. We teach people how to treat us, and when we finally set boundaries, we make room for the success and peace we truly deserve. You do not owe anyone your future just because you share a past. If you have ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated you, hit that like button and share your story in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience, justice, and reclaiming your power. Remember, you are the CEO of your own life. Do not let anyone else sit in your chair.